Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Wells Fargo Charlotte Regional President Kendall Alley.
Good morning and welcome to the Mint Museum here in Charlotte. We appreciate you coming out on Monday morning to spend time with us, to have an opportunity to talk about the great state of North Carolina and the things that we're going to try to do as we go forward with the conversation about what's going on with our real economy. We want to thank all of you, and particularly want to thank USA Today and WCNC for allowing us to partner with them to put this opportunity together. And glad that you could be here. As Wells Fargo is one of the North Carolina's largest employers, employing over 31,000 people in the state, as well as a leading small business lender, we're really thrilled to have a front row opportunity to see what's going on with the real economy in North Carolina. There are real pockets of growth that are unbelievably successful, and then we have challenges across our state that need serious conversation and thoughts to create a better economy for all of us. We're committed to North Carolina's economy. This year we'll originate more than $500 million worth of loans in this state to help medium and small businesses to try to drive employment and opportunity for our state to be better. In addition, and something we're very proud of, this particular year we'll contribute more than $16 million to local non-for-profits and organizations that try to make the communities that we serve as good as they can possibly be, something that we at Wells Fargo and our vision and values believe in completely in what we do. In fact, over the last 10 years, that number's been close to $200 million in the state of North Carolina, one of the largest philanthropy opportunities in the state, and we're very thrilled to be able to do that. Today, though, we're sitting here and the question is, so how do we capitalize on the great opportunities around this state? How do we mitigate the risks that are at us and the things that we have to deal with and keep our economic engine humming and, as a matter of fact, make it go faster? And how do we ensure the absolute best for North Carolina's best asset, which is our people and the opportunities that we need to provide them? Here today with us to consider this topic is U.S. Senator Tom Tillis. Senator Tillis has a long history of being a leader in the state of North Carolina. After having served in various state offices, including the Speaker of the House of Representatives, he was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2014. In Washington, Senator Tillis serves on numerous committees to include Armed Services, Veterans Affairs, both very important to North Carolina, Agriculture, again, Nutrition and Forestry, Judiciary, and the Senate Special Committee on Aging. During his time in elected office, Senator Tillis had a successful private sector career in technology and management consulting, which helps him understand the policy-making things that he deals with today in Washington. We look forward as he brings a conversation here with us today. As a closing, let me say that Wells Fargo's vision is to satisfy all of our customers' needs and help them succeed financially. We're proud to carry out that vision in cities and towns like Charlotte and Hillsborough, where we are additive and important. And we enjoy working with the members of our legislative bodies and senators, et cetera, to try to make this state the best that it can possibly be. So, Senator, we'd love to hear what you have to say. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Tom Tillis.
Thank you, Kendall. When I came up for the walkthrough, the gentleman who gave me the walkthrough, I asked how much time I should take, and he said, well, if you're a little under 15 minutes, I'll be happy. If you're a little over, I'll be nervous. So I'm going to be under. Thank you all for being here this morning. I always like being in Charlotte on a Monday. Oftentimes I'm already traveling back to Washington or I'm somewhere else. But I also got to go to the football game yesterday, which, if those of you can see, this side of my face is really red. I've got an east side end zone seat, but I tell you, if Cam could have just stuck that landing, it would have made him truly Superman. They did a good job. I hope Luke Kuechly's doing better. I'm a huge Panthers fan. It's a thrill of being about a 16-year PSL owner to be able to make most of the home games this year. I thought I would talk a little bit about what I think we need to do to let the states continue to build on success that some of the states are experiencing. And I believe that North Carolina is one of them. I think that the tax and regulatory policies over the past few years have stabilized what was an economy that was going in the wrong direction. I think that the unemployment policy that was implemented against the objections of a lot of people, and unlike any other state in the nation, not extending long-term unemployment benefits, reducing the benefit to get it to regional competitiveness, indexing the duration of the benefit to the prevailing rate of unemployment are all common sense methods for really getting North Carolina back to a competitive standing amongst its peer states and primarily the Southeast. At the federal level, I think that we need to take a look at the rampant uncertainty that exists in business today as a result of regulations. We could talk about tax policy, but for the most part, I think true tax reform is for the next Congress and another president to discuss, because I, for one, do not think that tax policy and tax reform can come at a $500 billion net increase in tax burden on U.S. businesses and on individuals. And that's what's on the table for our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to consider tax policy. So let's just accept it's off the table. There may be some spot decisions we make around simplification, but I can't imagine with a $500 billion potentially being taken out of the wallets of businesses and people that compete on the global stage that makes sense. So what do we have left? Regulatory policy. One regulatory policy that we sent to the President's desk that he vetoed was Keystone Pipeline. On a broader basis, I think that we need to seize the opportunity to have the United States economy positively affected by changes in our energy policy. I, for one, do not believe that in the week that we announced the lifting of export bans on Iran, that we should say that we're doubling down on not allowing U.S. petroleum industry to export. Say what you will about where we ultimately need to be on renewable energy and on environmental policy. It makes no sense to me for us to unilaterally disarm, particularly against somebody who's truly a potential adversary. So on energy policy, we need smart, environmentally responsible policy. We need to take advantage of the job-creating opportunities that it has, and we need to find ways to have that revenue that comes back into the country to also feed other efforts to where we can get to energy independence, a viable portfolio on renewables, et cetera. So regulatory policy is very important. We passed the Keystone Pipeline with bipartisan support, but for now, it's on the President's desk. Another thing that I think that we have to do if we're going to increase economic activity is increase free and fair trade. That's why I voted for Trade Promotion Authority. There was another reason, because we had a window of opportunity that had we not voted for Trade Promotion Authority in this Congress, it's unlikely that the next president would have Trade Promotion Authority, because the labor unions have actually done a pretty good job of preventing many of our colleagues from the other side of the aisle from voting for free trade. But now we have it on a 3-year basis with the opportunity to extend it for 3 years. So now we have a 6-year window where we can negotiate trade agreements. Voted for Trade Promotion Authority. I hope to be able to vote for the stream of trade agreements that will come. First among them is the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We're close, but we're not there yet in terms of provisions in the TPP that need to be corrected so that we make sure the U.S. is on a level playing field with some of our trading partners. Guardedly optimistic that we can get that done. I also think if you take a look at regulatory reform in general, we have to take a look at what I think are regulatory overreach with the National Labor Relations Board, with the waters of the U.S. How many of you are familiar with the waters of the U.S.? If you're a business person, I hope you'll go home and Google waters of the U.S. and understand the potential negative consequences it will have on North Carolina. It is literally structurally one of the largest federal land grabs in history, because what it does is it allows the EPA to really expand the footprint of what it regulates beyond the navigable waters. You know, the EPA is responsible for making sure that the streams and other contributing sources for water, once they hit an EPA-regulated body of water, that it's clean. But there are people in the EPA that want to extend that to a point that even on a bipartisan basis, most of the cities and counties in North Carolina recognize it'll be devastating to development. It'll be devastating to agriculture. We see cranes coming up here. My guess is as you expand the circles that these cranes can come up, it will be devastating to their ability to get these projects online, or it will increase their cost or increase uncertainty, which may make some marginal projects delayed because they really don't know what it's going to cost to get something done. They can't possibly make the investment that they need to, with the real possibility that they may never get that project online. So as we move forward as I move forward in the Senate, a lot of my focus over the next year and a half is going to be very focused regulatory reform efforts that I think will expand the buy box by eliminating a lot of the uncertainty for businesses to invest, seek capital, and deploy the capital. Another area that I want to talk about that I think is important is alignment of the labor force with the current needs, particularly in North Carolina. There's an organization here called ITology. Anybody heard of that? A group of IT professionals got together because we had, at the time, I don't know what the current number is, but about 2.5 years ago, it was 1,000 unfilled IT jobs in the Mecklenburg area. Now, this is when our unemployment rate was in the 9% range. But we couldn't find, and we had people looking for jobs, but the problem is the job skills that they had were not in alignment with the needs of the businesses seeking, people to fill high-paying jobs. It's one of the reasons why I supported the appropriation in our community colleges for work skills development that was specific to identifying the needs in the communities that they serve and making sure that we had programs that were in alignment with it, getting rid of programs that weren't in alignment with it. We need to do more of that. We even took it a step further in Catawba County by authorizing a pilot project where we increased the dropout age to 18. The reason we did that is in Catawba County back in the day, when the textiles and furniture business was really hitting on all cylinders, you'd have young men in 10th or 11th grade getting recruited by the mills to go get a good paying job. They could pay the bills and raise their family. Those jobs are not there anymore. Without a high school degree and oftentimes a community college or college degree, you will not have the requisite skills to go into the textile and furniture industries that are coming back in North Carolina today. And I might also add the reason why we have them here is not because they all of a sudden went away and came back. It's because there were some of them that had the vision back in the 80s and 90s to invest in capital so that they continued to be competitive when many of the marginal businesses, the very well-known ones you know around here, went out of business. So they've ended up being competitive on a global basis. Glen Raven Fabrics, Parkdale Mills, on a global basis because they understood the importance in innovation and in capital investment. Now, they've got these highly sophisticated businesses that need people whose skills match the needs of those businesses. Or they hire from without, or they go to other jurisdictions to set up and expand operations. We don't want that to happen because we have a great potential work pool here in North Carolina, particularly in the Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and Raleigh area. We just need to figure out how to exploit it. I, for one, think the federal government should do that by providing resources that incent state, university, and community college systems and K-12 systems to apply for grants that allow them to use the money that makes the most sense in the jurisdiction that they serve. What I don't support is a big monolithic government program that tries to pretend that we would know what the unique needs are in Buncombe County over what the state community college may know, like at AB Tech. So to me, it's a matter of focusing resources, providing resources at the federal level, making the cities accountable and the states, cities, counties, and states accountable, but staying out of the details. And that's probably the last thing I'll talk about is how do we fix, how many here think that we're going to have a balanced budget and full appropriations process coming out of the Senate this year? Right, we're not. Because the minorities made it clear that they don't want to go to regular order and pass appropriations. We've actually passed on a bipartisan basis 12 appropriations bills out of Senate committees. We're prepared to actually appropriate within the bounds of a budget that was passed by the House and Senate. First time in 10 years that balances over 10 years. And we're prepared to do the appropriations. But it's clear that Senator Reid doesn't want to get into the political cycle that would spin up. I think it's time and I think it's necessary. So we'll work on regulatory reform. We'll move forward with a continuing resolution. I, for one, am not for a government shutdown. I don't think it works. And I think there are better, longer-term, more visionary ways to get where you want to go on other issues. And shutting down the government doesn't make sense because it's another element of uncertainty that's going on right now that businesses are wondering, are they crazy enough to do it? So we've got to make it very clear that we're going to provide as much stability as possible in the face of many other structural things that have to be corrected from legislative action. The last thing I want to talk about is, finally, I'm looking forward to having an executive branch and members of Congress, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, who start taking seriously our need to fix this government. And I'll start with entitlements. Back during the election last year, I had a lady come up to me and she called me speaker. She said, Speaker Tillis, I can't vote for you because you're going to end Medicare. And I said, ma'am, I talked to my mom about that and she said I can't do that. It's just absurd to let these folks, regardless of where they are on the political spectrum, to think that anybody in Washington is honestly having those sorts of discussions. The discussion we need to have is right now, people who are either on Medicare or maybe getting on Medicare won't be able to get the benefit they depend on right now, 10 years from now, if we don't recognize the structural problems with Medicare and with Social Security and with Medicaid and with the Affordable Care Act. If we don't figure out how to claw back some of these regulations, solve the root problem, the root cause of the problem, but solve for the long term the problems with their fiscal foundations, then the promises to seniors, the promises to people who are on the margins are going to be broken because they simply will not have the resources in the federal government to fulfill them. Most of them are reasonably easy to fix from a pure financial perspective. They're difficult to fix when you don't have people in Congress who have the political will to make those tough decisions. And I'll give you one example of where I think it's proven to be helpful, and then I'll finish up. And I'll yield back a minute, it looks like right now. A couple of years ago, when we were at the height of unemployment, North Carolina was the 4th highest unemployment in the nation at 10.4. The federal government had offered to extend unemployment benefits another 26 weeks. We were the only state in the nation that decided not to do that. The only state in the nation, because everybody said it was going to be a political killer. And we did it anyway. We not only did not extend those 26 weeks, but we also cut the monthly benefit. And we set about the objective of retiring our $2.7 billion debt to the federal government. We paid it off early. Now we're debt-free and we're running a surplus. What did that do for businesses? It gave them certainty about, first off, if you're going to expand business in North Carolina, you weren't going to inherit a deficit you had nothing to do with creating. And secondly, it put us on a level playing field with other states. That is a form of it's a stretch to call it an entitlement program. Many people were on unemployment needed. I heard somebody say a third of his family at one point was unemployed here. He has eight kids in the family. But the reality is it has to be done in a smart way. And sometimes you have to make those difficult decisions if you really want to see fundamental changes in economic performance. And I believe that we did that in North Carolina. That's the sort of mindset that we need in Washington, partnering with the states to get out of the states' way and let great states like North Carolina really get to the top of the list in terms of the best performing state, the best state in the nation to do business with. Now I yield back my time. Thank you.
Now, please welcome Wells Fargo senior economist Mark Vittner.
Thanks. And my presentation's a good bit shorter because I think I was given 5 minutes or less. So we'll see if I can keep it to 5 minutes. But I'm just up here to help key up the panel, and I'm familiar with the survey that we've done for all the states that we've done it in. And this is we've done this in 5 states. We looked at, in addition to North Carolina, we looked at South Carolina, Minnesota, Iowa, and Oregon. And I've got to admit that when I look at the results for North Carolina, I came back a little surprised, because in comparison with those other states, North Carolinians seem to be a little more reserved in their assessment of where the economy is today and where it's headed, where their personal finances are today and where they're headed. There seems to be less optimism in North Carolina, despite the fact that actual job growth in North Carolina in the last 2 years has been stronger than it is in those other states. Over the last year, non-farm employment is up 2.6%. And I know a lot of people quibble with the quality of jobs that have been added, but in the last 2 years, the quality's actually been pretty good. The years before that, not so much, but we've had 5 years of solid job growth, and the numbers have been pretty good. The unemployment rate has been coming down, and as Senator Tillis said, it's come down from some very high levels. When our unemployment was up there around 10%, I think it was 9.6% 3 years ago, it was the highest unemployment rate in the South, which I found is astounding. How could North Carolina, and everybody used to say, thank God for Mississippi because it made everybody look better, but Alabama is not saying that today because Ole Miss just put a whooping on them Saturday. But Mississippi was number 2, and I just said, how on earth could our unemployment rate be that high? I mean, it was astounding. The changes that were put in place did make a difference. But I got to tell you that one of the things, and I think this comes back to some of the assessments that we say, politics seems to cloud everything now. And when the changes were made to North Carolina's unemployment insurance system, one of the things that I found most troubling as an economist is the day before the numbers came out that showed that the unemployment rate had improved, was beginning to improve, we began to see articles in the newspaper calling into question whether that improvement was legitimate. So somebody in the State Employment Security Division was sharing the data a day early because the results were out there a day early. I couldn't believe how politicized it was. I do think the decisions that were made, as tough as they were, made a meaningful difference, mainly because of how different the economic performance is in Charlotte and Raleigh and Durham and it is in the rest of the state. And when you have one uniform unemployment benefit, what had happened is that the money that could be earned by receiving unemployment and working off the books for cash was so high that it was causing people to drop out of the workforce, the official workforce, and to kind of work under the table and receive unemployment benefits. And that was making it very hard for businesses in rural parts of the state to attract workers. So those decisions actually did come back and benefit a little bit, but there is another side to that too. Folks in North Carolina, folks around the country still have a lot of angst about the economy. None of the states showed a great deal of optimism. Nobody was incredibly optimistic about the economy, thinking that our better days were behind us. Most folks in the survey are concerned that it takes more to succeed today and that their children are going to have a more difficult road ahead of them than they faced. And I understand that from a lot of different angles. I think that part of that comes back to where the economy has been. We've had a recovery in place for 6 years where we've averaged 2.2% GDP growth. That's not all that much. 2.2% GDP growth over 6 years. It's a relatively long economic expansion, but we used to think that 2.7% was the norm. And as weak as 2.2%, or weak as economic growth has been, 2.2%, it's been enough to cut the unemployment rate from 10.1 to 5.1, which means that potential GDP is somewhere less than 2%. The Federal Reserve had estimated that potential GDP earlier this summer was 1.75%. They cut that estimate to 1.5% last week when they reduced the when they left interest rate. They made the decision to leave interest rates unchanged. They said that they now believe the economy's long-run potential growth rate is 1.5%. Well, it didn't come across as clearly then, but the implication from that is that it's going to take 57 years. If our potential growth rate is 1.5%, it'll take 57 years to double our income. And I think that's at the root. I don't know if the 1.5% is true or not, but the potential growth rate, the speed limit on economic growth in the economy is lower today. And Senator Tillis alluded to one of the reasons, a big part of one of the reasons is the regulatory burden on businesses increased a lot. Two others, though, we're operating on our tax code that was written in the mid-1980s, before there was an internet, before the Berlin Wall came down, before we had this era of global trade. We're operating on our immigration system that was also put in place in the 1980s, well before the era that we're in today. The last point that I'd make on the angst, the uncertainty that's out there, and I do feel it's getting a little better, is that when you look within the job growth, the 2.6% jobs that we added, and I mentioned that the quality is pretty good. In the last 2 years, most of the jobs that were added were full-time positions. But that's not been the case since the recession ended. The recession ended in the middle of 2009. In the first year of economic recovery, we had very little job growth. And we might have a month or two of job growth followed by a month or two of losses. For the last 5 years, we've been adding jobs on a consistent basis, month after month. But collectively, after 6 years of economic recovery, there are now 2.3 million more people working today in the United States than there were before we went into the recession in December of 2007, which sounds good. I mean, we recovered. There's 23 million more people in the United States today than there were in December of 2007, which means the employment population ratio, the labor force participation ratio have fallen tremendously and are lower today than they were at any time since the 1970s. And demographics doesn't explain the extent of that drop. On top of that, when you look at the net gain of those 2.3 million jobs, 2.2 million of them are part-time. We've only added 100,000 full-time jobs since December of 2007. And we've added 23 million people to the population. That's where a lot of the angst is. I had a call from a woman on Friday, and she was a little unnerved at something that I had said. And what I'd pointed out was that when the Fed made the decision not to raise interest rates last week, it was a little perplexing. I mean, it was a close call. It was 50-50. People were about 50-50 on Wall Street as to what was going to happen there. And I had mentioned that I thought the Fed was somewhat boxed in because the unemployment rate is close to the definition of full employment by virtually everyone on the Federal Open Market Committee and all the Federal Reserve Bank presidents. And I think it was shortened. My quote was that the unemployment rate is close to nearly everyone's definition of full employment. And she wanted to know, well, what is full employment? Because I'm working as a contract worker right now. My income hasn't gone up in 10 years. I'm trying to find something full-time, but I can't. And is that full employment? And I really don't have an answer for her. I mean, the answer is what I was talking about is the Federal Reserve's definition there in terms of of where their thinking was. But the unemployment rate today does not mean the same thing. I mean, essentially the point that she was raising and that she was making is the unemployment rate does not mean the same thing today that it meant 10 years ago. And a lot of the folks that are working today are not working in the way that they would like to be. And I think that comes through very clearly in these North Carolina numbers, some of which is due to the structure of our economy, which has a big legacy in manufacturing. And as the senator said, a lot of the jobs that we lost in manufacturing required one set of skills. A lot of the jobs that we've gained from new industry and from the expansion of existing industry required another whole set of skills. So the people that lost out during the tough times are not necessarily the ones that benefit that are benefiting from the new industry coming today. Well, that's all I wanted to say there. I'm going to go ahead and move to the panel. I would like to leave it on one more optimistic note, though, and that is that our forecast for North Carolina is still relatively upbeat. So I hated to dwell on all the negatives there, but with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to the panel, and hopefully we can pick up the discussion there and take some questions. Thank you very much.
We need to get up there.
Ladies and gentlemen, your moderator for this morning's panel, please welcome WCNC's afternoon anchor, Sonia Gant.
Well, good morning to all of you, and thanks for being willing to start your morning here. Our goal, of course, with anything that happens on Monday morning at 8 o'clock, some of you arrive, is to make sure that not only is it informative, but also enlightening. So we have a wonderful group that's gathered. You can't talk about the economy without having an economist. So we have an economist, we have a reporter. We have two people whose essential job is to really promote Charlotte, both to the rest of the world, but also to promote Charlotte within Charlotte and looking at the cultural and social vibrancy of our city. And of course, we have to have a local businessman. So I'm going to ask our panel to come on up. And as they're coming, I'll tell you the first job that I gave them. I said, I want you to think of one word, just one word that describes the Charlotte area economy or the region. And then they're going to explain to you why they chose that word from their perspective. So I want to introduce to you, first of all, Dr. John Connaughton. Many of you probably recognize him because he shares his thoughts about the Charlotte area economy with us very frequently. He is officially the director of the Babson Capital UNC Charlotte, I want to get it correct, the UNC Charlotte Economic Forecast. They gave their most recent one earlier this month in September. He's a professor in economics Economics at UNC Charlotte. So we're delighted to have Dr. Connaughton with us.
Thank you.
And so now we put you on the spot and ask you for your one word. And I should say I told them during the mingling time that they were not to share their words with each other. So it'll be interesting to hear.
Disparate.
Why so?
Well, I think that, and Mark alluded to a little of this earlier in his talk. What we've got is sort of a tale of two cities. We've got parts of the economy that are thriving, more high-tech, higher skilled jobs. We seem to see shortages in those, and wages are in fact being bid up in those sectors of the economy. But the more traditional parts of the economy, the more traditional sectors of the economy, the ones that got hit hardest in the recession and are not recovering, and those jobs are going, there just aren't any of them. The supply of labor is much higher than the demand for those jobs at that skill level, and wages are stagnant or going down in some instances in those. And so what you have basically are two different economies. It's not unusual. We've had this more geographically related in the state in the past, but now it seems to be even within local economies, you've got this disparate experience, if you will, between maybe 25% of the economy that's doing really, really well and 25% of the economy that's just not doing well at all. So.
Your word.
I actually have two words, which reflects a little bit what John said. My first word is dynamic. I think that Charlotte is a dynamic city. It's still a young and growing city. And at the same time, I think Charlotte is going through transition. So my second word would be transitional. And Charlotte is moving into a new place, and we're learning how to be a big city.
Like that. Our next panelist is Eric Schochner. He's our businessman on the panel, and he's a native Charlottean. For many of you, it's rare to meet one of those, so meet Eric. He is currently serving as the Chief Financial Officer at CPI Security Systems, but he spent a number of years at PricewaterhouseCoopers. The company, as you know, CPI Security, specializes in custom home and business security systems, is the 15th largest security provider in the Southeast. He is a graduate of UNC Chapel Hill, none other finer institution as a current graduate as well. Eric, share with us your one word.
Well, until I heard Mark speak, I had a different word. Now, I'm going to talk about North Carolina economy is healthy. Now, it's interesting after listening to Mark speak, but I see it in terms of what we're doing. We just broke ground in a 120,000 square foot building out off of 45. I see it in our recruiting numbers. A couple years ago, we would get 100 applicants for 10, 15 positions. Today, in a job fair, we're lucky to get 15, 20 applicants come through. So from our perspective, we're having to be more creative in how we attract, retain employees. From our customer side, our evaluation of our customer credit scores, what they're doing, our delinquencies are at the lowest point. So from our perspective, what we're seeing in North Carolina is that we have a healthy economy. Now, it's changing. It's not perfect. There's much smarter people that will talk about that, but I think it's a very healthy economy and a great place to live and work.
Michael Smith is seated next to Eric Schochner. He is the president and CEO of Charlotte Center City Partners. And the goal of the group, of course, is to drive not just economic development here, but also really to take a look at the social and cultural development of our city as well. He has served in that role for the last 10 years, but before that worked right down the street as Chief Financial Officer for the Charlotte Chamber. He's a North Carolina native. He grew up in Greensboro, but he's been here the last 18 years. Michael, which word did you choose?
Powered.
Powered.
Powered. I feel like we are in a great part of our cycle where there has been so much momentum building, and we're at that great part of the cycle where you have to have your sail up now. That this is a part where we are able to pull away some as a state. Now, our perspective at Center City Partners is really about the strength of our downtown, serving as the foundation for a healthy region. And we are building great infrastructure now. We're building new office towers, we're expanding hotel rooms, we're building new apartments. All of that becomes the infrastructure to bring more people and more companies to our community. So we're at a good part of the cycle right now.
And finally, last but definitely not least, Eric Spanberg. We're delighted to welcome him. He's a senior staff writer at the Charlotte Business Journal, but if you turn on your radio to WBT Radio on Thursday mornings and also Friday afternoons, you might hear him sharing his perspective. He's been covering the business of government, the sports business, hospitality, and the coverage of airlines in this city for 21 years. He's a proud LSU graduate, grew up in Louisiana, but I think
it's a good weekend.
It's a great weekend for him, but he is here to stay. So Eric, what one word would you use?
My word is insecure, and I guess I have to thank Mark for his, he didn't influence me though. I've always kind of thought that about Charlotte, and I say that both positive and negative. I think if you look back at Charlotte's history, one of the things that's always happened here is that Charlotte has always sort of been the little kid brother that's trying to get up with the big guys, always striving to do things that a lot of people thought were not possible, from getting the NBA and NFL to having the nation's largest bank. So I think that certainly continues. And then I think when you look at the last few years with our economy, even the pillars of the local job market and our reputation, look at what's happened. You had Duke Energy with a big merger. You had U.S. Airways go into American Airlines. You've had Family Dollar. You've had Belk, this hometown company that is now owned by a New York private equity fund. You've had Harris Teeter. So there's just been a lot of change. It's tumultuous, and some of that is going on everywhere. But I think Charlotte is always very concerned, largely in a good way, about how it fits into the rest of the world. And I think that really creates a lot of momentum and a lot of ambition.
Before we begin sharing with you some of the survey results, I want to let you know that we want this to be an interactive discussion. And so we've divided our program into 3 topics. At the end of each session, I'm going to ask if there are any questions. Please, please, because we want to hear what you think out here, and I want to make sure that we get your questions answered. Be sure to just stand up wherever you are, and we will take your question at that point, because we want to make sure that it's part of the conversation that's happening on that topic. So I will make time for those most assuredly. All right, let's take a look at some of the survey results. In this first segment, I would call economic optimism. Mark, and I say that with a question mark, and you led us into that very, very well. The percentage of people who expect their local economic conditions to be better a year from now. Across the country, it was 28%. Here in North Carolina, it was 19%. People, when asked to think about their community in the next 5 years, the percentage who said there would be fewer jobs across the country, that percentage was 19%. Here in North Carolina, that was 24%. When they were asked about better paying jobs in 5 years across the country, it was 25%. Here in North Carolina, it was 19%. As you heard Mark mention, North Carolina is certainly a state that has a variety of different economies. And your perspective, of course, could be shaped by where you're living at the time. And Katie, I know you and I had a great discussion about this on Friday. So, I mean, share with us how you think where you live could definitely affect the way you might have answered that question. And I should say, for those of you who don't know, the survey was taken in June. More than 3,300 people took part. There was an oversampling of about 500 people in North Carolina. So there were some charlatans probably in that mix, but there were others in our state who were interviewed as well.
Right, and I would say, reflecting on what Senator Tillis said, we have a lot of rural communities in the state of North Carolina, and we are all very fortunate to live in Charlotte, where we have a bubbling and growing economy, but not every economy is that way. So in the state of North Carolina. So in our state, we have a lot of micro economies of different communities. So in a rural community, taking that survey, if I'm taking that survey, I'm going to give my perspective and what my experience has been. So if I'm in a rural county and the largest employer has closed down and left, and all of these people are out of jobs, they're going to have a perspective on that is not quite as positive as someone who lives in Charlotte, who might have a really good job and things are going well and we're building buildings and that type of thing.
And that clearly, I mean, I think that makes sense. And I know, Dr. Connaughton, in September, when you took a look at the economic forecast for this area, and let's think about the people were answering in June. In September, share with us, because you said there are 4 key things that need to begin happening in order for things to improve here.
Well, actually, I'd like to comment on the survey results. We're focusing here on the difference between the national results and the North Carolina results. We're a little less optimistic. When I look at it, less than a quarter of the people are optimistic everywhere. Okay? Now, to put that in perspective, think about this. There's a group in Washington, Mark, you know them, the NBER, National Bureau of Economic Research. They are the keeper of the business cycle, and since 1854, that's 1854, it's a couple of centuries ago, we have had 33 business cycles, okay? So essentially 33 recessions and 33 expansions. Right now, we're in the 5th longest expansion of all time. Think about that for a while, 5th longest, and yet everybody is sitting there. Not everybody, but only 25% or less have an optimistic viewpoint of where the economy is going to be in a year, despite having just experienced the 5th longest economic expansion on record. That's what's very troubling. And I think the last survey question that asked about where do you expect wages to be a year from now, and most everybody was, more than 3/4 think they'll be lower, essentially, or at the same level. And I think that's really what's driving all of these results. Yeah, jobs are coming back. Mark's right, some of them are good jobs, and certainly in those sectors, their wages are being bid up. But most of the jobs that we lost, and over half the jobs we lost in the state and nationally, were either in manufacturing and construction. Those are the typical high school educated, middle class pathways. And they're gone, and they didn't come back. And I think that's really, really what we're dealing with right here when we look at these optimism questions. We're dealing with, yes, an expansion, but it's only on paper an expansion, and there's a large segment of the population that's been excluded from this.
Let me, before then you share some of your forecasts, let me just ask the panel. Lots of times, it sounds as if you're saying sometimes perception.
I don't think it's perception. I think it's reality. I think when we look at wages, they have been stagnant. I mean, Mark gave us some figures that I think are very telling. With most of the jobs, I mean, we're still sitting with basically the same number of full-time jobs today that we had in 2007. Okay, so the quality of jobs is simply not there for people. Now, in some parts of the economy, that's not true. It's doing very, very well. Labor markets are very tight. Wages are being bid up. But for a lot of people that wound up being adversely affected by the recession, okay, despite the aggregate numbers being fairly good, their part of the economy where they get to play and participate really hadn't changed a whole lot in the last 5 or 6 years.
Eric Schochner, I know when you and I talked, and your industry may be one that's a little bit different than what's being described, you said we don't have enough people. We
have a hard time getting people to come through the door to fill our roles. And that's plain and simple. The jobs have changed, yes, but we need bodies. I mean, there are certainly jobs out there. They're not perfect, and the technology is certainly changing that. The education's changing as to what you need and you might need in the future. But we're doing anything and everything we can to attract and retain bodies. That's it. I mean, I'll just tell you that. From where I sit, and our average wage is $50,000 across all of our employees, and it's tough to get employees to come work for us.
And you're talking about full-time positions. Full-time
employees. We only hired full-time employees at this point. We were fortunate through the downturn. We didn't lay anybody off. We've been growing at 15% over the last 3 or 4 years. Now we've changed. We're a service industry. Obviously, that's one of the areas that's grown if you look at a lot of the statistics. But at the end of the day, the economy in North Carolina, we're struggling to get employees, to get bodies to come through the door.
What do you think the issue is?
Well, fortunately, I do. Talking about what the senator just said, changing some of the things they did for unemployment's really helped us because it's forced people to come through the doors. What is the issue? At the end of the day, there's a lot of opportunities out there. And although wages aren't growing at the same rate that we'd like to see them, we're certainly feeling the pressure on our side in terms of where we're hiring today versus where we're hiring at a starting salary 2 or 3 years ago. So we're feeling those pressures. There's just opportunities for people to find jobs that they didn't have 2 or 3 years ago. And I don't normally consider myself an optimist. I'm normally on the pessimistic side, but I do believe, the economy is fairly healthy in this market, in this region. Again, not all the right jobs for all the right people, but I think we've done particularly Charlotte and some of what you guys have done, some of what the Chamber's done. We're recruiting great employers to this region. They're bringing high-paying jobs. That's only going to continue to bring in ancillary companies to the region, which will be a great thing.
The companies coming into Charlotte, or the companies that are here already, how positioned they are in the export market, because it's huge. And if you do it right, and if you know what you're doing, there's tremendous opportunities there.
I think Eric wanted all the hard questions.
No, that was.
Oh, okay.
Katie,
Don't look at the Economist.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, Katie, do you want to talk about the efforts of globally recruiting?
I can take a portion of your question. The Charlotte Chamber does do global recruitment. We have a economic developer from Asia. She's from Shanghai, speaks Mandarin, and she goes over to Asia twice a year. We also have an economic developer from Munich, and he recruits in the European region. He also recruits from India, and has previously done, in his previous job, did some recruiting out of India. So we'll start doing some more recruiting out of India as well. So we do have a very strong effort to bring in foreign companies into the Charlotte market, and obviously all of those companies are going to be exporting, and but we love having their presence here. So I'm addressing that part of your question.
It doesn't really address it. What you're talking about is exactly the opposite of what I was talking about. You're talking about bringing companies, foreign companies, into North Carolina.
Right.
I'm not talking about
And you're talking
that.
about
I'm talking
current
about
companies
domestic
exporting.
companies to take their technology and their wonderful products, like the sweet potatoes in North Carolina, or whatever it happens to be, and exporting their products overseas, bringing in that wealth of income that's out there, because the markets are huge. And that's what I was referring to, was increasing the mental, because I remember being at a World Affairs conference, and a fellow who's the head of the Commerce Department here in Charlotte, when I mentioned export, he says, that's not a big interest for us. And I was shocked. I mean, I was really shocked, because in our company, it represented 45% of our sales. And you know, with sales, because the banking people will tell you, when you export, you got to be darn careful you get paid.
Yeah.
So we did it with guaranteed letters of credit, guaranteed by a U.S. bank, especially the countries who sent it to.
Let me help you understand a little of why you're probably not getting the answer you want.
Because you don't export.
No, it's actually simpler than that. You're sitting here in the world's largest economy, okay? It's an $18 trillion economy, well, 17 and change, but what's a few billion dollars amongst friends? And by far, it's the largest economy. It's more than twice as large as China's economy. When you look at, and very small part of our GDP is in the export-import arena, okay? It's what does it mark, about 12%? Some 12 to 14%? Yeah, excuse me? 14. 12 on exports, 14 on imports. And so it's a small part of the economy. And so when you have companies that have this incredible 330 million population, $18 trillion economy to market to, they tend to get focused on that, and historically we have. We've seen exports rise from 50 years ago, where it was 5% of the economy, to now it's 12 to 14%, depending on whether you're looking at exports or imports. And as a result of that, you've got almost a built-in bias, if you will, in terms of satisfying the domestic market. Now, that's not true for every company. Different industries have different situations that require them to market to the world, okay? Such heavy equipment manufacturers, in your case, textile equipment and stuff like that. But by and large, what you're looking at here is an incredibly large economy that historically has not been export-oriented. And you compare that to a country like Germany, okay, which has, I think, 50% export activity, and 50% of their GDP is export. A smaller country in the center of Europe and exporting products to the world. It's just a completely different focus of their economy. Now, we've seen change in that in the U.S. over the last half a century, where it's increased. but it's still a very, very small part, and it's not the first thing that comes into mind. It's how can we expand regionally into different regions of this country. I mean, we don't have a lot of countries that even, service the entire countries yet, okay? So, that's part of the deal, and that's part of why you don't see the emphasis, and it's basically industry specific.
But I'm going to have to.
Yeah.
And Sonia, just real quick. Your point, we actually do, we work with a lot of veterans organizations to recruit people in veterans, community colleges, but those students today have opportunities and options that they didn't have, 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. So when I say we're trying to be as creative to find the individuals to come work for us as we've ever been in terms of recruitment. So yeah, we do work with those local community colleges.
No problem. If I could, well, let's go ahead and take that one and then we'll move on. You've been so patient.
I would like to make a couple of points. One is to reinforce what Norman Cohen was saying, and a couple of other things which I wanted to mention. We are a very small company, just a fraction of Norman's company, but we are also very much export-oriented. And it is sad to see that there had been activities by the government which are destroying export opportunities. And one is the non-continuation of the Exim Bank. We are relying on...
Where's Senator Tillis when we need him?
We're relying to give our customers in other countries better conditions so that it gives us the opportunity to export. We have only exported to 18 countries, not like Norman has, but that is something which has been troubling us lately, that we cannot give the good conditions anymore to our customers. Another anti-export opportunity activity I found with the present situation with Iran. It looks like that the situation will be relieved, and it looked like to me that there would be export opportunities to Iran. I was deeply shocked when I read that the only company which will be able initially to export to Iran is Boeing Aircraft. Well, the situation which we come from in terms of considering Iran as a military problem, and then we sell military equipment, and for me, aircraft is military equipment, sell that to that country does not make too much sense. We are, all over North Carolina, excluded from that possible market. The other point I wanted to make is I'm an optimist, or let's say realist. When we look at the export of the United States, 14%, Mark mentioned, and when we compare that to Germany, I think it is a distorted situation because we have pockets in the United States which are strongly export-oriented, and we have other areas which are not so much export-oriented. And the same is happening in Europe. And I think we should compare us with the European market and not just with Germany. And when you compare the export of Germany outside the European market, then they are also in the range of 15%. So they are not doing much better than what we are doing in comparable size markets. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comment. I'm going to let that marinate with them, and I do wish the senator had been here so that you all could talk about that. I want to share with you now, in our second part, we're going to take a closer look at manufacturing and what the survey said about that. So we're talking about key industries, and Katie, certainly that was interesting. That was something I didn't know about Mecklenburg County having the greatest number of manufacturing companies in North Carolina. The percentage of people, though, who feel that manufacturing is struggling across the U.S. was 46%. In North Carolina, it was 71%. 69% of the people believe the manufacturing industry positively affects North Carolina's economy. And 65% believe North Carolina has the infrastructure necessary to support new manufacturing activities and investment. And Katie, excuse me, I'm sure you've already detailed how important manufacturing is here in Mecklenburg County. Talk about some of the infrastructure and the questions you get from companies and what makes it work here, what needs to happen here to keep it growing.
I think that manufacturing is it's an industry that's in real transition right now. Manufacturing is moving from a lower tech to a higher tech place, and what happens when you do that is the companies are making larger capital investments, but those large capital investments are replacing jobs, and so there are not quite as many jobs. So I think that that's one of the reasons why people felt poorly about jobs in manufacturing. What was the second part of your question? Sorry.
Well, I'm going to give you the second part here. Part of the infrastructure, I'm sure companies want to know, as someone mentioned out there, are community colleges keeping up? Can I find a trained workforce here that can handle how manufacturing has changed?
Yeah, and community colleges are keeping up on two levels. They are actually producing students that are in the areas of manufacturing and in the areas of what's the word I'm looking for? Like technology types of manufacturing positions, but they are also, so they're producing students, but they are also in the training area. So they're taking people who were previously in other positions and they're retraining them to be in high-tech manufacturing positions. So I think that North Carolina is made a very strong concerted effort towards that area, and Charlotte has too. Charlotte Works, which is a division of NC Works, works directly with manufacturers who are laying off people or who are hiring people. So they're a great resource for any of you manufacturers that are in the audience. Charlotte Works is a wonderful resource for you as far as finding labor, and if you're laying off labor, helping those people find other positions.
Yeah, and I think if you look at Central Piedmont Community College, I mean, there are a number of examples of Tony Zeiss and the rest of the leadership over there working directly with companies. I mean, I think Siemens is probably the one that most people know. It was mentioned in the President's State of the Union address a couple of years ago. So there is a pretty clear link between business need and what students are being taught. Now, it can always grow and be improved, but I think that mentality is certainly there.
Yeah, let me add one more thing. The community college and the UNC Charlotte and Charlotte Works and local employers are in constant conversation about what is the need for positions, what companies need, and so the university is trying to create those partnerships with companies to produce students out of the universities that can move right into these companies, like right into Siemens or right into Westinghouse or Toshiba or Wells Fargo or Bank of America. So they have very strong relationships with those companies. Same with Central Piedmont Community College. And Charlotte Works is also talking with those companies and working with companies who are laying people off and companies who are hiring people. A lot of our current relocations, companies that are relocating into Charlotte are working directly with Charlotte Works as well to help place people in Charlotte in those new companies that are relocating to Charlotte.
Michael, what do you hear from company execs upon a relocation here?
Sure.
What is it that really sold them on the city?
Well, with regard to manufacturing specifically, I don't think we have to think in terms of greenfield, 800 acres, somewhere off an expressway. There's a great move across the world and across the U.S. towards light industrial, urban manufacturing, the kind that my father grew up around, where there would be a facility somewhere just outside of New York, everybody be within a walk zone, and that would be the labor force. we've got a concept in Charlotte that we're working on, which we call the Applied Innovation Corridor. And it's that area between Uptown and UNC Charlotte. It's enveloped by what will be commuter rail out to Davidson and Lake Norman, the light rail extension out to the university. And it's an area that had a great history of manufacturing, a lot of textiles. And we think it has the infrastructure, it already has workforce housing, it's going to be transit oriented. But I think the survey results that you're seeing are, again, a result of a huge transition in the kind of manufacturing that we're going to bring back, like Katie discussed, that is more efficient, requires less physical labor, more technologists. Mm-hmm. But we think those are going to be like great 21st century middle income jobs that we want to have as a part of our urban Charlotte.
Eric, you cover a number of different areas of business. Which ones do you think are particularly healthy here? And which are the ones that have the biggest opportunity for growth? I know when we talked about resiliency, and you said the airline, definitely that you feel like that's been the most resilient one.
Yeah, I think in the years I've been covering, I mean, I think in the newsroom we had buried U.S. Airways about 59 times, and they just would not go away, which is a good thing, obviously, because the airport and the hub airline, I think most people would agree, is the single most important thing in terms of Charlotte's prosperity and Charlotte's growth. And so the fact that Doug Parker, who is the CEO of American Airlines, he was at U.S. Airways, the fact that he found a way to engineer a merger with American Airlines, create the world's largest airline, and that they are maintaining their second largest hub in Charlotte, you just can't overstate the importance of that. And it even goes back to the gentleman who was talking about exporting. One of the things that you hear people at the Chamber and elsewhere talk about is needing a direct flight to Asia, needing direct flights to other international locales. Well, being with the world's largest airline, that's the single best way to have a hope to achieve that. So I would say...
Thank God it wasn't Delta.
Right. I mean, and in a similar way, thank God it wasn't Citigroup when Wachovia fell by the wayside, because you just don't know. Wells Fargo ends up putting their East Coast hub here. That sounded like a blatant plug. It wasn't. Nobody paid me. But I would say for resiliency, definitely American Airlines / U.S. Airways.
And healthy industries that are up and coming here?
Well, healthy and up and coming might be two different things. One of the things that's interesting, I'm dodging a little bit, one of the things that's interesting is that we talk so much in Charlotte about diversifying, which is important. But sometimes we kind of hang our heads about being a banking town. I mean, remember, Bank of America and Wells Fargo, these are $80 billion companies. Yes. And so you want to make sure that you maintain what you have there. The biggest employer in Charlotte right now is Carolina's healthcare system. They are an $8.5 billion company, just to show you a little bit of the difference. So these two banks are, 10 times that. So I would say that the banks may not be the healthiest, but they are still probably the most important. And then, of course, we haven't mentioned, I don't think today, we haven't mentioned Duke Energy, which is the largest utility in the nation. So, as important as the small business and the entrepreneurs and the tech and all those things that we're trying to nurture are, you don't want to forget about those big players out there that are also doing a lot of the heavy lifting.
Dr. Connaughton, when we talk about diversification, where do you think it's important in the future that Charlotte place some emphasis where we have room to grow?
Well, obviously, the diversification lesson was rammed home in 2008 when we had the real calamity of the banks and the bank failure, almost failure of Wachovia, and the tremendous trouble that Bank of America has been in over the last 6 years as well. So, putting all your eggs in one basket is, we've got the memo. We now understand that. But I would argue that while it's okay to take on some initiatives to try to pick out the next winners, shall we say, it's more important to maintain organic growth within the community and let entrepreneurs and businesses expand and develop and move in. Economic development, recruitment's important, obviously, but not to rely on trying to devise a plan that says we're going to be the next great X industry center. Simply let that emerge. I mean, if we look back at it, Eric, you correct me. You've been here a while. You were born and raised here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
He's the one.
Yeah. I don't remember the chamber or the city government or the county government saying, let's become the second largest banking center in the United States. Okay. I think that the industry did that. Now, it's important for us to make sure that we continue to foster that and allow them to grow and expand and maintain them here. But again, I don't think that we need to be looking for the next economic base for Charlotte. I think it will emerge if we simply create an environment that is business friendly. And you've all heard that before in Charlotte. It's something we've prided ourselves in over the years, to be a business friendly community. And I think we need to make sure we maintain that.
I'm going to open it up now for a few questions. If there are any, please be sure to stand so that our mic runners down front here.
Astrid Chirinos with the Latin American Economic Development Corporation. Thank you so much for your input and for your overall outlook. To your point, Eric, and to Dr. Connaughton, we are looking at some uncertainty and disparity, as well as issues with access, equity, and inclusion in terms of our economy. You've been focusing on the job part. Dr. Connaughton talked about entrepreneurship, and we know that over 60% of the jobs that we have in our community come from small businesses. I have not heard anything about building capacity and nurturing the entrepreneurs in our community, because the answer is not always a job. It's providing to the supply chain opportunities so they can grow as well with the great banks that we have in our community and the great industry, especially in manufacturing, energy, automotive, and all of those areas. So I would like to hear, what do you think, or what are you doing right now in your roles to really be able to provide a platform for entrepreneurs to grow so they can create more jobs for those who are looking, and also train and develop that talent?
Michael?
Astrid, I think it's a great question. We are going through a period of transition in our local economy where we're seeing a lot of the great entrepreneurial stories of the last generation mature, like a Family Dollar, like the generations of the Belks, Harris Teeter. We're seeing that again and again. We have to create a climate where companies with great ideas can become capitalized here. I think we are such a banking town that sometimes we are too good at underwriting. As somebody who tried to raise capital in this market while I was living here, I ended up raising money everywhere else. I think having our seed capital, our early venture, our venture infrastructure strengthened would go a long way. I think moves like what we're doing with
Avid Exchange.
Yeah, with Avid Exchange, with incubators. Avid Exchange, $225 million equity raise, but Packard Place and having facilities like that, having Level, which is a new kind of shared space model. We've studied some interesting things that through a Knight Foundation grant, we went up and looked at small incubator shared office space, kind of creative spaces that are going on in Philadelphia, trying to bring ideas like that back to Charlotte, where it really can be a real estate play, but create some infrastructure where it's easier to start new companies.
Well, I think the other thing is where John is every day, and you've heard plenty of people say it from Erskine Bowles on down, is the importance of higher education in terms of driving innovation and entrepreneurship. And so UNC Charlotte, all the schools around town, the stronger higher education is, if you look at any place that's thriving, that's bringing in millennials, they have a very good base of colleges and startups and entrepreneurs. It's not a mystery. It's very clear.
But you're right. There's a hole there. Right. If you look at Charlotte in terms of venture capital, startup capital, there's a hole there. It doesn't. We're addressing it, but we don't seem to be making a lot of progress, because I remember having this conversation on a forum about 15 years ago.
Yeah,
very
I was going to say this is one that comes up every year. So we have not found the formula for that one.
So keep fighting.
Let me add one more thing. Astrid, I can tell you that the city and the county are making a very concerted effort to help entrepreneurs too. So stay tuned on that.
Let me get a microphone.
I was on the UNC Charlotte Board of Trustees for 11 years, and I do know that UNC Charlotte has a very, very strong incubator system for new emerging companies. Mm-hmm. And some of them that have grown out of it have become extremely successful in this area.
Do you think, Astrid, is there an awareness issue about some of the incubators as well?
Yes, actually, because I'm involved and I'm also a commissioner in the Central Line Economic Development, we're very familiar with all the incubators. However, they don't really have a continuum, a platform from startup all the way to the mature. We looked at some of those gazelles, but we really don't look at the startup businesses that really need that support with the innovation. So there is a gap, and we need to figure out where that venture capital or support, because the banks not always support that entry part of it. So especially in our community, we know that we are about 55% or so, the census said, we're non-white now. And a lot of those African-American, Latino businesses, Asian businesses that need support do not have the access to a lot of those opportunities. So I think that's where we need to have more focus in creating an integrated platform.
Any other questions? Now's your chance. Well, that leads us perfectly into the final segment as we talk about the workplace of the future. I'm interested in hearing from each of you, and we'll go down the line, just about your perspective on what you think is key for the Charlotte region and our community to continue to grow, the economy to grow. What do we need to see to make sure it's a healthy, vibrant, it's dynamic, I'm trying to use some of your words, not insecure. We want to become less insecure. But what do you think is important for the future? Eric Schachner, I'll start with you.
Oh, wow. Certainly great local business leadership, and I think we've seen that transition now from the B of A's, Humacalls. Now we've had different leaders step up. Educationally, no doubt in my mind, the workforce needs to be educated. They need to have the different skills of the 21st century in terms of produce. And lastly, to think about the infrastructure within Charlotte in terms of the airport's such a critical need, roads. I mean, I know the governor's got an infrastructure program out there, but the reality is for Charlotte to continue to be a hub and a destination for people to come want to work in, we need to have good schools, good roads, and a good regulatory environment. I think those things will impact it tremendously.
Michael?
We've done a nice job of being an in-migrator of talent. We need to continue to do that. Yeah. For us to grow our companies here the way we want to grow them, we need to train our residents. We need to continue to educate them, but we have to be a place that is desirable, because we find again and again that companies are choosing locations where they know they can find the talent and continue to bring more talent there. I think the statement that we've got to continue to invest in our infrastructure is key, because if we're going to grow the way we are growing, we've got to build out that transit system. We've got to create mass transit connection to our airport. We have to continue to strengthen our relationship with American Airlines just to become a tougher, let's raise the change costs further and further on them ever leaving that hub. For us to be their number 2 hub, with the imbalance between the amount of traffic that we create for the airline versus what connects through our hub, it's let's just say we're punching way above our weight with the service that we get out of that airport.
Eric?
Yeah, so this is where we get rid of the biscuits and have a big plate of kale. I think that for me it would be education, and I know everybody's head just hung, and but I have big hopes for Project Lift and things like that. Our community may be taking a broader look at trying to address all aspects of what is plaguing us in terms of poverty and lack of opportunity. I think that's so important. And the thing that's most worrisome about it, besides the obvious drag on the economy and all those boring words, is the fact that we had a local election last week. We had a primary. 91% of us did not even bother to vote. And without turning into the school marm, I mean, if we don't vote, if we don't care about the issue of education, then we can't sit in these rooms and have panels and say, gosh, why does nothing change?
All right. Katie?
I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but a lot of the reasons why companies come here and why their employees follow them here and relocate here is because of our airport access to other areas of the world and other areas of the nation. I have to say labor, labor, labor. Every company I talk to, the first thing that they want to talk about is labor, and do we have skilled labor here? Do we have the type of labor that meets their needs in what they need for hiring? Because companies don't want to come here if we don't have the labor for them to fill the positions. I have to agree with Michael. I think that we need to maintain our assets. That is another reason why people come here, and you know, we have wonderful arts here, we have wonderful sports here, we've got the Whitewater Center, we've got really, really nice assets that people want to come to, and that equals quality of life. So I think that's what I would say.
Okay.
Okay, time for the professor. The secret to the key to our success and future is education, education, education. And I don't mean just college education. 30 years ago, there was a pathway to the middle class with a high school education. That pathway does not exist anymore. You've heard everybody here talk about companies are looking for quality labor. Mm-hmm. Michael mentioned that we've got to continue to be attractive to import that quality labor. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that we need to be willing to spend the nickel in order to home grow that quality labor. At the high school level, the community college level, and the university level. We have got to do all of that. We have the basis here to do it, but as of yet, we haven't had the wherewithal, I think, the commitment to do it. We're still relying on Michael's approach, which is import that quality labor. If we're going to be successful in this next century, I think we need to generate it ourselves.
I have to say labor, labor, labor. Every company I talk to, the first thing that they want to talk about is labor, and do we have skilled labor here? Do we have the type of labor that meets their needs in what they need for hiring? Because companies don't want to come here if we don't have the labor for them to fill the positions. I have to agree with Michael. I think that we need to maintain our assets. That is another reason why people come here, and you know, we have wonderful arts here, we have wonderful sports here, we've got the Whitewater Center, we've got really, really nice assets that people want to come to, and that equals quality of life. So I think that's what I would say.
Okay.
Okay, time for the professor. The secret to the key to our success and future is education, education, education. And I don't mean just college education. 30 years ago, there was a pathway to the middle class with a high school education. That pathway does not exist anymore. You've heard everybody here talk about companies are looking for quality labor. Mm-hmm. Michael mentioned that we've got to continue to be attractive to import that quality labor. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that we need to be willing to spend the nickel in order to home grow that quality labor. At the high school level, the community college level, and the university level. We have got to do all of that. We have the basis here to do it, but as of yet, we haven't had the wherewithal, I think, the commitment to do it. We're still relying on Michael's approach, which is import that quality labor. If we're going to be successful in this next century, I think we need to generate it ourselves.
So now I want to turn to all of you. Is there something that you didn't hear them say that you think is important as we look toward the future and is key that shouldn't be ignored? Or do you have a comment on what you heard?
I would like to mention one aspect which I had not heard anything about, and that is that we have really excellent colleges here. SPCC, CPCC, the university, and some smaller private universities, especially in the area of training, educating people in manufacturing. There is always a lack of availability of good trained labor. And I think that this problem starts already not at the college level, but at the high school level. I think some years ago, 2008, about that time, the word manufacturing was a four-letter swear word. Fortunately, that has changed in the meantime. Thank you. But in the minds of the parents of kids which go to high school, manufacturing is still the dirty old place at the corner. And I think we have to work on changing that impression about manufacturing. Thank you.
And certainly there are some partnerships, I know, at Olympic High School. I mean, they really have connected with the business where these apprenticeships lead to full-time jobs. So more of that kind of thing where you're educating people that it isn't the factory of old.
And I think, Michael, I think I've heard you say this before on a much smaller level, using manufacturing, tiny scale manufacturing as a tourism magnet, where you see people making shoes or custom purses or things like that. So you're sort of killing two birds with one stone, if you will.
Absolutely. There's such creativity going on. There's over in the Cedar Yards in the 3rd Ward, there's a young couple that's started this denim fabricating shop. And you go in and, it's custom jeans and custom jackets, and, they're bringing denim from Greensboro, they're bringing denim from India and from Italy, and do it right on the spot. Those little craft shops, that is definitely a wave that's coming across the nation.
Anyone else? Quiet group. Everybody, I'm sure, is thinking about the day that they have before them.
It is Monday.
Well, I do want to say a big thanks to our panel for being willing to be here on Monday morning. Dr. John Connaughton, Katie Hines, Eric Schochner, Michael Smith, and Eric Spanberg. We do appreciate you all being here. I want to thank the audience for being here and listening and for your wonderful questions. And hopefully you found it informative and enlightening. That's what we wanted to do on a Monday morning. Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of the day. I'm sure you are ready to head where else but to work, which is important for everyone today.